A corpse hangs suspended in eternal darkness, tongues stretched and pinned by iron hooks, while rivers of flame lap at feet that will never find rest. In the shadows beyond, countless souls writhe in torments so specific, so methodical, that even death offers no escape. These are not the fever dreams of a medieval torturer. These are the visions of St. Peter himself, recorded in a text so disturbing that the early church buried it for nearly 2,000 years. The Apocalypse of Peter stands as Christianity's most suppressed scripture, a forbidden gospel that dared to map the geography of damnation with such vivid, unflinching detail that church fathers declared it too dangerous for mortal souls to contemplate. The year is approximately 150, somewhere in the shadowed margins of the Roman Empire. While other early Christian texts spoke in parables and metaphors, this apocalypse ripped away all pretense. No symbolic beasts, no cryptic numbers. Just raw, visceral horror, rendered in language so clear that readers could smell the burning flesh, hear the screams echoing across lakes of fire, feel the weight of eternal suffering pressing down upon them. This is not theology for the faint of heart. Peter's visions strip away any comforting ambiguity. Hell is not metaphor. Damnation is not abstract. The torments awaiting sinners are as real and physical as the bodies they inhabit, eternal and inescapable as the God who ordained them. Chapter 1, the forbidden vision. The Mount of Olives rises silent in the dusk. Its slopes heavy with ancient olive trees, whose twisted trunks seem to writhe in the fading light. Here, according to Peter's testimony, Christ gathered his disciples for a teaching unlike any other. What began as questions about the end times transformed into something far more terrifying, a revelation so complete that it would be suppressed for nearly 2 millennia. Peter writes that Christ spoke first of signs and wonders, of the coming judgment when the dead would rise and the living would face their eternal fate. But the disciples pressed further. They wanted specifics. What happens to the righteous? What awaits the wicked? Show us, they demanded, the fate of souls beyond death's veil. Christ answered with a vision that would haunt Christianity forever. The text describes how Peter's eyes were opened to see beyond the physical world. Before him materialized a landscape of impossible geography, a realm where physics bends to accommodate eternal suffering, where space expands to contain infinite torment. The first thing Peter sees is fire. Not metaphorical flames, but actual consuming fire that burns without destroying, that causes endless agony without granting the mercy of annihilation. This is the fundamental horror of Peter's hell. Death offers no escape. The damned cannot die. They can only suffer, endlessly, their bodies reconstituting moment by moment to experience fresh torments. Peter describes the landscape in detail that would later influence countless artistic depictions. There are rivers of fire flowing through valleys of darkness. There are pits filled with substances too horrible to name. There are regions of ice where sinners freeze eternally, their bodies brittle and cracking, but never breaking, never finding the release of oblivion. What makes Peter's apocalypse uniquely disturbing is its principle of contrapasso, divine retribution that mirrors the sin. Each punishment is designed to reflect and amplify the original transgression, creating a perfect circle of cause and consequence. Blasphemers, those who spoke against God or cursed his name, hang suspended by their tongues. Iron hooks pierce through the flesh, suspending the damned over lakes of fire. They cannot speak, cannot cry out, cannot beg for mercy. The very organ they used for sin becomes the instrument of their eternal torture. Peter describes how these hanging souls twist and writhe, desperate to free themselves, but the hooks only dig deeper. The flames below lick at their feet, close enough to burn, but never close enough to grant the mercy of destruction. They hang there for eternity, a warning to all who would use their words against the divine. Those guilty of sexual immorality face torments equally specific. Peter writes of a place where adulterers and fornicators are immersed in lakes of filth and excrement up to their necks. The substances they wallowed in during life, the corruption they embraced, becomes their eternal environment. They cannot escape, cannot cleanse themselves, can only endure the suffocating embrace of their own spiritual pollution. Murderers, are cast into a ravine filled with venomous creatures. Serpents and scorpions, worms and demons attack them ceaselessly. The text describes how these souls are torn apart repeatedly, their flesh consumed and regenerated in an endless cycle of death without dying. They experience the terror and agony they inflicted on their victims, multiplied and extended into infinity. Women who obtained abortions face a particularly graphic punishment that reveals the text's concern with early Christian sexual morality. They stand neck deep in blood and gore, while the spirits of their unborn children shoot flames into their eyes. The imagery is deliberately shocking, designed to create maximum horror around acts the early church condemned. Christ, in Peter's account, serves as tour guide through this realm of horror. He points out specific souls, explains their sins, describes their punishments with what seems like clinical detachment. There is no mercy in his voice, no hint of the compassion that defined his earthly ministry. This is Christ as judge, as executor of divine justice, revealing the full weight of divine wrath. This is why the text was ultimately suppressed. Not because the church rejected the concept of hell or divine punishment, but because Peter's visions were too effective, too visceral, too specific. They threatened to create a Christianity based purely on terror rather than love, on fear of punishment rather than hope of salvation. Chapter 2, the architecture of damnation. Peter's hell is not a single pit of fire, but a vast, complex realm organized with bureaucratic precision. The text reveals a carefully structured afterlife, where every category of sin receives its designated space, its specific torment, its eternal accommodation. This is hell as divine architecture, a monument to systematic punishment that would influence Western imagination for centuries. The realm begins at its outermost edge, with what might be called the vestibule of the damned. Here gather souls whose sins were minor, whose transgressions barely warranted eternal punishment. Yet even this region, the least terrible of hell's domains, surpasses any earthly suffering. These souls experience constant anxiety, perpetual regret, the gnawing knowledge that they failed to achieve salvation despite its availability. Moving inward, the geography darkens. Peter describes descending through layers, each worse than the last, each calibrated to accommodate increasingly serious offenses. The architecture is vertical and horizontal simultaneously. Some souls hang suspended in air, others are buried deep beneath the surface. Still others are cast into chasms whose depths extend beyond sight. The river of fire serves as hell's primary geographical feature. Unlike earthly rivers that flow downward, this one defies nature, sometimes flowing upward, sometimes horizontally, its course determined not by gravity, but by the requirements of punishment. Souls are cast into its currents, swept along in agony, unable to escape the burning flow. Peter provides specific details about the fire itself. It is not like earthly flame. It burns hotter, with colors that have no names, producing smoke that suffocates without killing, that blinds without destroying sight. The damned can see through the flames, can watch other souls suffering around them, can witness their own bodies burning and regenerating in endless cycles. Around this river cluster, various regions of specialized torment. There is the pit of the blasphemers, where those who spoke against God hang by their tongues. The hooks that pierce them are not simple iron, but instruments that seem alive, that twist and turn to maximize suffering, that adjust their grip to prevent any acclimatization to pain. Nearby lies the lake of filth, where adulterers and fornicators are immersed. The substance filling this lake is described in terms too graphic for many translations. It is excrement and corruption, yes, but also something worse, a spiritual pollution that burns like acid, that carries the concentrated essence of sexual sin made manifest. The text describes how demons patrol these regions, ensuring no soul escapes its designated punishment. These are not the horned devils of later medieval imagination, but beings of pure malice, servants of divine justice, who take pleasure in their work. They carry instruments of torture, whips and brands and tools whose purposes Peter cannot fully describe. For murderers, the ravine of venomous creatures extends downward into impossible depths. Peter writes that he looked into this chasm and could see no bottom. Only writhing masses of serpents and scorpions, spirits of murdered victims transformed into instruments of vengeance. The walls of the ravine are too smooth to climb, lined with a substance that burns at the touch. The false witnesses occupy a region of perpetual blindness. Though their eyes burn away in the flames, they somehow retain the capacity for sight, forced to witness visions of the truth they denied, the consequences of their lives playing out in endless repetition. They reach out blindly, trying to touch something real, but their hands pass through phantoms and memories. Women who obtained abortions stand in the lake of blood, which Peter describes as having its own terrible life. The blood moves like living tissue, clinging to the damned, entering their mouths and noses, suffocating them without killing. The spirits of the unborn circle above, shooting not just flames but accusations, crying out for the lives they never lived. The rich who ignore the needy occupy a barren plain where nothing grows, nothing lives. They push their stones eternally upward across this wasteland, and when they finally reach what seems like a summit, the stones roll backward, crushing them, breaking their bodies, which then regenerate to begin again. The futility itself is part of the punishment, the endless repetition without progress or hope. False teachers hang inverted in a region Peter calls the place of great darkness. Here, even the flames provide no light. The souls burn in absolute blackness, unable to see, able only to feel. The isolation compounds the physical torment. Each soul believes itself alone, the only one suffering, abandoned even by fellow damned. Peter describes how time operates differently in this realm. Each moment of suffering stretches into subjective eternities. What might be seconds in the mortal world becomes years, decades, centuries of unending agony for the damned. They have no hope of adaptation, no possibility of numbness. The punishment remains forever fresh, forever new, forever unbearable. This is what made the apocalypse of Peter so dangerous to the early church. It didn't just threaten hell in abstract terms. It blueprinted damnation with such precision that believers could almost map their journey from sin to punishment, could visualize exactly where they would end up based on their specific transgressions. Chapter 3, Paradise Lost and Found. After the horror of hell's landscape, Peter's vision shifts. Christ guides him upward, away from the flames and screams, into regions of light so pure that mortal eyes can barely comprehend them. This is the other half of the apocalypse, the promised reward that gives meaning to the threatened punishment. Yet even here, in paradise itself, the shadow of hell's horror lingers. The transition is abrupt, deliberately jarring. One moment, Peter stands at the edge of the abyss, watching souls writhe in eternal agony. The next, he is lifted into brilliance, surrounded by radiance that seems to emanate from the very air itself. The contrast is calculated, designed to emphasize the vast gulf between salvation and damnation. Paradise, in Peter's vision, is organized as carefully as hell, though its architecture serves joy rather than suffering. The text describes a vast garden, but not like any earthly garden. The trees here grow from soil that sparkles like precious stones. Their trunks are gold and silver. Their leaves shimmer with colors that have no earthly names. Their fruits glow with inner light. Rivers flow through this garden, but unlike hell's river of fire, these waters bring refreshment and healing. The text describes 4 great streams, echoing the rivers of Eden, flowing from a central source. Souls bathe in these waters and emerge, transform their spiritual bodies, becoming more luminous, more beautiful, more perfect. The righteous dwell in this garden, clothed in garments of light. Peter struggles to describe these clothes, settling for metaphors of brightness and glory. They are woven from something finer than silk, whiter than snow, yet they shine with their own radiance. Each soul's garment reflects their level of righteousness, glowing brighter or dimmer according to their earthly faithfulness. Angels move through this garden as servants and companions. Unlike the demons patrolling hell, these beings radiate benevolence. They attend the needs of the righteous, though in paradise there are no actual needs. The angels serve as guides, teachers, companions, revealing deeper mysteries of divine reality to souls ready to understand them. Peter describes architectural features that mirror hell's inversions. Where the damned hang by their tongues, the righteous have their voices amplified to sing praises. Where adulterers wallow in filth, the pure bathe in crystalline waters. Where murderers are torn by beasts, the peaceful rest in gardens, where even the lions are gentle. The text emphasizes that paradise has different regions corresponding to different levels of righteousness. Those who were merely good dwell in outer courts of beauty and peace. Those who achieved greater sanctity occupy inner chambers of more intense joy. The greatest saints stand closest to the throne of God itself, experiencing the fullest possible communion with the divine. Peter describes a great feast where the righteous gather at tables laden with spiritual food. This is not physical eating, but something more profound, a nourishment that feeds the soul directly. The fruits from paradise's trees, the bread broken at its tables, are channels of divine grace, material manifestations of spiritual realities. Light in paradise has qualities beyond mere brightness. It carries information, emotion, truth itself made visible. Souls bathe in this light and learn without words, understand without explanation, know as they are known. The light reveals connections between all things, showing how every act of love ripples through eternity. This theological vision shaped early Christianity profoundly. Believers understood themselves as choosing between these two stark alternatives, walking a narrow path with paradise on one side and hell on the other. Every moral decision carried ultimate weight. Every sin risked the unthinkable. Every act of righteousness built toward eternal joy. Peter's vision of paradise ultimately serves his larger message about justice and consequence. Heaven and hell together form a complete system of divine accounting, where every deed receives its exact recompense. Every choice leads to its inevitable end. This is moral universe made visible, ethics rendered in geography, righteousness and sin given their final forms. Chapter 4. The legacy of fear. The apocalypse of Peter did not die when the church suppressed it. Instead, it went underground, seeping into Christian consciousness through channels both obvious and subtle. Its visions would haunt Western civilization for centuries, shaping art, literature, theology, and the nightmares of generations who never read the original text. The influence begins immediately in the early church. Despite its eventual exclusion from the biblical canon, Peter's apocalypse shaped how Christians imagined the afterlife throughout the crucial formative centuries of Christianity. Preachers drew on its imagery even when they couldn't cite it directly. Theologians engaged with its ideas while carefully noting its non-canonical status. Medieval Christianity absorbed Peter's apocalypse thoroughly despite its official rejection. The principle of contrapasso that Peter established became central to medieval understandings of divine justice. Every sin deserved its mirror punishment. Every transgression would be answered with torment specifically designed to reflect the crime. This thinking appears everywhere in medieval religious culture. Sermons on the Last Judgment borrowed heavily from Peter's descriptions. Morality plays dramatized his visions of hell. Mystery cycles staged elaborate scenes of damnation that echoed the apocalypse's specific torments. The text's influence was ubiquitous precisely because it was unofficial, seeping into popular religion without requiring formal endorsement. The visual arts embraced Peter's vision with particular enthusiasm. From the earliest Christian mosaics to the great cathedral sculptures of the High Middle Ages, artists drew inspiration from the apocalypse's detailed descriptions. The tympanum of countless churches featured Last Judgment scenes where the damned suffered punishments Peter had cataloged centuries earlier. Manuscript illuminations brought the apocalypse to vivid life. Illustrated books of hours included visions of hell, clearly derived from Peter's text. These images served as meditation aids, encouraging believers to contemplate their mortality and the consequences of sin. The more graphic the depiction, the more effective the spiritual lesson. Then came Dante Alighieri in the early 14th century. His Divine Comedy represents the fullest flowering of seeds Peter planted centuries earlier. Dante's hell is organized according to principles the apocalypse established. His contrapasso punishments echo Peter's mirror justice. His guided tour through damnation recreates the narrative structure of the apocalypse itself. The Catholic Counter-Reformation deployed Peter's visions with renewed vigor. Jesuit preachers developed elaborate meditation techniques focused on hell's horrors, encouraging believers to place themselves imaginatively in the apocalypse's torments. Spiritual exercises by Ignatius of Loyola included contemplation of hell as a central practice, drawing directly on traditions Peter established. The 20th century brought total war and industrial genocide, horrors that made Peter's hell seem almost quaint by comparison. The trenches of World War I, the death camps of World War II, created real landscapes of suffering that rivaled anything the apocalypse imagined. Some survivors described their experiences using language borrowed from Peter's tradition, hell made manifest on earth. Yet the apocalypse retained its power precisely because it was about eternal rather than temporary suffering. However horrible earthly torments became, they ended eventually in death. Peter's hell offered no such mercy. The damned could not die, could not escape, could find no relief ever. This remained uniquely terrifying even in an age that had witnessed unprecedented atrocity. The apocalypse of Peter, forbidden gospel of Christianity's darkest visions, continues to haunt us because it speaks to something ineradicable in human consciousness: the fear of judgment, the hope for justice, the terror of damnation, the longing for paradise. These are not merely religious concepts, but human universals woven into the fabric of how we make meaning from existence. The forbidden gospel remains forbidden in many ways, too disturbing for comfortable faith, too absolute for nuanced theology, too visceral for abstract philosophy. But it endures, passed down through centuries, adapted and transformed, yet fundamentally unchanged. Peter's vision of heaven and hell, suppressed but never destroyed, continues to shape how Western culture imagines justice, consequence, and the ultimate meaning of human choice.